Hi everyone, welcome back to Babbling Sloth. Myself, going to do a live review on the unexpected win. Sloth. We surprisingly went into the game. We went and played against Nottingham Forest, and we come away with 3 points. This is something we've not seen all season. It was a pretty good performance, and we'll get into all the nitty-gritties, and we'll also talk about the end of the end of the transfer window as well, and how that played out and how that went. And it's been an interesting, I would say, 48 to 72 hours at West Ham with everything that's been going on, especially with Paqueta stuff as well, and just seen the vote of no confidence letter from the West Ham Independent supporters group as well. So yeah, lots to talk about, but we'll start off with the game as well first. And before we get into that, Sloth, what was what were your initial reactions after us actually winning a game of football this season?
I think I was expecting Forest to do that to us. Like I even said that in our preview that, I think we just didn't look in any of the other games that we've seen from West Ham. I think up until maybe Arsenal away, under Potter, we just looked really fragile, and there were things across the 90-minute performances which just screamed errors leading to goals. And I think this is this first performance in a while that I've seen. I think actually, you know what? We've not really conceded any major chances. There's been, no real efforts that Hermansen struggled with, and we looked pretty in control. I think the worry for me is that 45 minutes in the first half, there were some issues, and I just wasn't expecting us to be as clinical as we were. I think that is one of the positives from the game, is just we're not just relying on Bowen to be clinical, and now we've got a striker in Wilson who looks clinical. And look, I'm not going to say I'm now super positive about it. I'm not. But he looks clinical, and he does look like he is going to be able to cause problems, score some goals, and make things happen, which is something that Nicholas Fulkrug just does not look even remotely capable of doing. So lots of positives. I think a few negatives in that first half that I do think, with all due respect to Nottingham Forest, better teams will take advantage of and will make us work harder with. But I think it was a really professional performance, and strangely enough, our best defensive performance has come in a back four as opposed to this silly back five or three at the back system that we've been persisting with, even though we never really seem to look very good with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And let's get into the lineups before we kind of get into the nitty-gritties of the game. And as you say, it was a surprise. We went with the back four. Sorry if the image is a bit blurry, but essentially, we kind of matched up with what Nottingham Forest went for. The midfield wasn't really a surprise in many ways. We don't really have a fully fit left winger at this point, so it's kind of very natural that Fernandes would maybe play in that position. We probably expected Paqueta to play in there, but it was more Fernandes as we played. But it was pretty fluid. I think we kind of mainly went into a free in midfield, and Paqueta had very much a loose and very free role across that front, with Bowen being typically the most furthest forward of all of our players, and Fulkrug kind of dropping in more into that, I guess, attacking midfield role. But Mavropanos coming in, staying in, keeping his place. Obviously, Todibo dropping to the bench, he has Placid to deceive once again so far this season. Fullbacks, I don't think there was any surprise after Kyle Walker-Peters' last performance. He was really solid against Wolves, so I think he definitely deserved his place. And we've mentioned, obviously, the Chelsea game where Wan-Bissaka was, for lack of a better term, awful. But when you saw that lineup, did it give you a sense of dread, a sense of just this is going to be good? Did you think it matched up quite well with what Forest were putting forward, or did you think that maybe were going to be some mismatches?
I'll be honest. It was a bit of a mix for me. The four at the back and the change in system is something that we've been crying out for a long time, and I think people have rightfully been quite critical of Potter not making this change sooner. Now, do I think it would have meant we'd have beaten Chelsea? No, not in a million years, to be honest. But I think we looked a lot sharper, and it's something that needed to happen, in my opinion. It's been coming under Graham Potter that the back three simply isn't good enough, and we're very lucky, I think, that Nathan Naya Aguerd is such a bellend that he has forced his way out of the club, because I really worry about the judgment in wanting to keep him. Part of me does think that if he had been willing to stay, we'd have gone with the three at the back, but I think it's a very positive step in the right direction, and if we don't stick with this going forward, it's set up against pace. So there is actual pace in that back line, believe it or not, which is something that we've been crying out for years. Mavropanos adds physicality on top of that pace. Great, Carl Walker-Peters, he offers pace and a willing runner, but it's the combination of all those things. Having someone who is a bit more confident on the ball, I'm still not convinced overall with Kilman, but I think technically he is going to be what I think Graham Potter wanted Naya Aguerd to be, someone who can actually play a pass and carry the ball. And hopefully, if he can sort out his heading and sort out his physicality, we'll see a major step forward. But I think we matched them quite well across the park. It's just that attack, and I keep going back to it. In that first half, I think there just wasn't enough. And I don't know if you've seen that clip going around on social media, but it's where it looks like James Ward-Prowse is having a go at Fulkrug. And I think this is a key example of just, it's not necessarily Fulkrug's fault, but it's a lack of a coordinated press.
It's a breakdown. It's one player wants to press and is thinking, oh, I'm triggering the press, turning around, and the rest of the team are sitting deep. It's that team just starting to understand as to when to press forward. And, both are right and both are wrong in that incident, because you can get up the pitch, squeeze the pitch, make the pitch much tighter, potentially win the ball. And if we move up on Sangare and we win the ball, then we're directly in on their back four. So in that situation, you can understand it from both sides. One is like, well, if we push out, I push out of position, he plays through, but it didn't matter anyway, because he went to Sangare and they played through anyway. So even if he would push up, it would have made zero difference. But, what do you think about the point of, again, as well, like, we could have, maybe weren't forced into the back four, we could have actually gone with Todibo. But do you think it was more that our back three situation has been so poor that we needed a bit of a radical, I say radical because we haven't seen the back four this season, we needed to go back to, I guess, the basics, and the basics for this team has been a flat back four for many a year. I know two players are new to this, but it has been a fundamental point of West Ham playing a back four for the last 4 or 5 years, really.
I think the issue with that is that if you play a back three, then if Todibo, we know he has these fitness issues, we know he has one leg shorter than the other, and it causes more injuries. So we know that is a fact, and I think if you're going to play a back three, you have to have strength in depth, and we simply did not have that at the weekend. I still don't think we do, but that's neither here nor there. I don't think we have the strength in depth to keep playing a three at the back, even if we put Wan-Bissaka in three at the back, and play him right centre back. I don't think that his performances warrant.
Yeah,
I don't think his performance warrants being played either. You know, I think it sends out a bad message if you're that bad in a game and then you still get picked. And
Mm.
I could say the same about Aguerd, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that he kept getting picked. So it's not just me picking on Wan-Bissaka. I think that we simply do not have the quality to stick with a back three while we are effectively a centre back short. It's better to be safe than sorry. And even though, in my opinion, we lack the quality up top, I think we have enough quality out wide and potentially through the middle to be able to caveat that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, I think when we look at the first half overall, I think that defence dealt with things very well. There was a lot of pressure from Forest. They were getting the ball into good, dangerous positions, but really one of the only points that they actually kind of got at us was they got in down the right hand side. It was a cross whipped in, and the way the commentators talked about us, if it would have been a tap in for Wood, but really, actually, Mavropanos was in a great position. Even if it was played slightly ahead, Mavropanos is either getting a toe end onto it, which could potentially turn into an own goal situation, but he was in a position where he was completely going to get rid of that ball and mark it out for Wood. But that was really, in all honesty, in the first half, I felt any kind of pressure from them. One thing I did think was interesting and what we dealt incredibly well with, considering how bad we were against Chelsea, was they clearly targeted Hermansen at every set piece, especially at corners. They flooded our 6-yard area, got players in and around. And I think, considering what happened in the last games, the players were really cool-headed and really calm. Hermansen also did well in that situation, made sure he had separation, got players in and around to kind of give him blockers as well. And I think what was really interesting was how we dealt with that and how professional we were in it. We didn't give him any chances from set pieces, and we saw in the Chelsea game just how awful we were managing that. Like, did you have the same kind of view in it? Did you think how we managed, how we dealt with it was much better?
I think for me, like, first of all, I think Mavropanos had his best game in a West Ham shirt since the performance under David Moyes at the Emirates, when he was just an absolute colossus. I think he was fantastic. He completely dominated Chris Wood. He was able to keep up with the pace of Callum Hudson-Odoi. I thought he was brilliant, and he was my man of the match, to be honest. I know that people will say Paquetá, and he was great as well in that second half. I just think that Mavropanos was, for the 90 minutes, completely dominant. And I do kind of agree that he marshaled that really well. I think when you have a two at the back, it makes those defensive decisions, particularly for marking corners, so much easier, because you're not communicating with a three. You're working with two people. You can say to your man, Mavropanos can shout over to Kilman, you need to pick up him, and you're not worrying about what the third man at the back is doing. And I know people might say, oh yeah, but you would normally worry about what everyone else is doing in your side. Well, your centre back's job is to defend the corner, is to defend an area. And if you're going to do that, then you need to know where your centre back is, where your partner is. So I think they did really, really well. They can allow, someone like Souček to drop back and be aerially the person who gets their head on it or goes for that first ball. And I think Mavropanos and Kilman looked so much more assured. I think that's part of why Hermansen looked that bit more confident and was punching things a bit better, because he didn't have to worry as much about the placement of the defenders in front of him. He knew exactly where his centre backs were, and it kind of gives the goalkeeper a bit more confidence.
Yeah.
I'm 5'8". I'm not saying that from a goalkeeper's perspective. Like, in no world am I
5'10". So yeah.
In no world am I coming out and catching a cross. Like, I'm not. I'll be able to at five-a-side, but not in a game. But I think that we looked so much stronger. And the point I was going to make about the press is that that was one thing that really worried me going into the game, is that normally Forest really press well, and they press in a coordinated manner, and that was something that really seemed at odds across the 90 minutes for them. I'm not sure if it's just the fact that they had Ndoye and they haven't played together for as long, but it just seemed like they all weren't on the same wavelength, and there was that disconnect between them. There was a disconnect between Morgan Gibbs-White, and it just wasn't clicking. But
Yeah, I
take
think there's
nothing away from our
this year
defenders.
that no one has lost the ball more times or been dispossessed more times in possession than Morgan Gibbs-White, which is quite a
But it's with the caveat of with a poor touch. So
yeah,
we have to make that very clear. So, but I do think that part of that is down to the fact that we were actually pressuring. You know, we were challenging for those first balls, which is something that you and I have long.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah, and I think what I found really interesting, I think that we mentioned that we struggled in the first half, but we at times struggled to get two passes together. I think that's because we were trying to play some 1-2 touch football when it wasn't really on. But someone that we've talked about many a time is saying, he's a blunt instrument and he does struggle. I do think Souček, whilst he did for me look uncomfortable at times in those tight spaces and having to play those quick passes, I think he acquitted himself very well and didn't, from memory, I can't remember him really losing the ball in those situations and was really quite tight. But what I did quite enjoy as we started to grow into that second half, which we did in phases. Obviously, there was a lot of kind of waves of pressure. I'm not going to say attacks from Nottingham Forest. I don't think they really attacked us. It was just waves of pressure resulting in maybe set pieces, but there wasn't really much going on there. But what I did enjoy was the little link plays that we saw between Fernandez and Fernandes, depending on how you want to say it properly with the accent, and Paqueta. They seem to really kind of connect and be a bit of a wavelength, looking for each other. And I was really impressed with, I'm going to say Fernandez because I keep saying Fernandes. I'm going to sound like an idiot. The way that they connected at times was really encouraging, and I think for his first game, the level of work he went through in that first half and was able to win us some cheap fouls by winning the ball and just darting into space or taking someone on. I think it was a very encouraging first half in patches. And we were probably, in all honesty, when it comes to generation chances, we probably had the best two opportunities in that first half. And the one where it was orchestrated down the left-hand side and laid back to Paqueta towards the end, I think it was actually the first shot on target in the half, which also showed that when we did get the ball, we were able to manipulate the situation. I believe it was a lovely pass from Diouf as well down the wing, which then Fernandes went up. But again, it's that presence of mind and calmness to just look up and see what's around him. And Paqueta held his run so well and got onto that. It was obviously a shot directly at the keeper, but it was something that gave a little bit of promise to that. Well, actually, we are still in this game. We are a bit under the cosh, but we're in the game.
I think there was that chance with Fulkrug when Fulkrug could have easily squared it across to Fernandes, but it was one of those things where it's kind of, you're a striker, you probably want your striker to hit that. And I think in terms of Fernandes and Paqueta, we look so much better when we had a bit of turn of pace in the midfield. And I think what it allowed us to do is take a bit of pressure off Souček. And I had an eye roll at about 5 minutes in, I think it was, when Souček booted it. Like, you could see he was going for a long pass and he booted it. It just went about 5 yards in front of him, but completely into the stands. And I was like, oh God. And I think I even looked at my timeline on Twitter, and I was like, people just going, typical Souček. And I was like, oh God, no, it's gonna be bad, isn't it? But as you said, he was really impressive in the sense that he picked up fouls, he won us back the ball, and the first and second balls, we say this all the time, but he would knock it down and we would actually challenge for it.
Yeah.
So I think when you have two players with a bit of pace, like Fernandes and Paqueta, or pace and ability, it gives you so much more of an outlet and so much more of a danger when you're even just in your own half. The fact that Fernandes can spin on the ball and carry it, it makes you so much more dangerous. And it's something that we've not had probably since Declan Rice, to be honest. And even that's a different kind of threat. He's not quite the same goal risk that you would expect from someone like maybe Fernandes. And I think we looked really positive. It was one of those though where I kind of got to halftime and I thought, oh God, please don't throw it away from here, because this would be typical West Ham. Even the first game of the season, against Sunderland, I thought the first 45 minutes we weren't terrible. There were bright moments in there, and I was kind of thinking, like, I was reeling from that, to be honest. I was like, oh God, please, like just let us get to the second half, start well, and don't concede. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I agree. The first half was a war attrition, and I give it to Ward-Prowse. I'm very critical of Ward-Prowse. I wouldn't say we're fan base is too quick to over criticise. I think ultimately we're seeing a player who, a bit like Mark Noble, has a function, but not a function that should be the main starter. Has a very key role in the dressing room. Has a function maybe later on in certain games coming in just to give that little bit of calmness, that older head and an experience, and that work rate. And I'll always say that he will work hard and he does get around the pitch. It's just his legs are running through treacle half the time. And that's part of the problem in the Premier League, is when you've got players that lack that speed of mobility, it can be a problem, especially when you're playing against someone like Forest, who have, Elliot Anderson, who is able to get around the pitch. You've got Sangari, who has those like telescopic legs and is able to like devour ground and get across. It does make it difficult, but he did have a very solid game in there with Souček. I think them two marshalled that really well, and Fernandes obviously dropped in to make that a free, and then Paqueta put in a lot of work. I think Paqueta ended the game in total with the most recoveries out of the entire team, which is, again, impressive. And we'll get into Paqueta's role in the second half and how those recoveries actually kind of played a big part. But that first half was just really a war of attrition. We had the best chance. Forest had a lot of the ball without really doing very much with it. And as you say, I think Mavropanos marshalled, Wood incredibly well in that first half. And then we get into the second. I think that that war of attrition piece, both teams came out in the second half a bit of a different attitude. I think the rain played a part, gave a bit more of a zip to the surface and meant the ball moved a bit quicker. But I think, again, we earned the chance. We had a 52nd minute. The only other proper chance, which is a bit of a loose pass from Paqueta. But we meant about Fernandes, his work rate. He wins the ball off a poor touch, lays it into Fulkrug, who, whilst didn't have a great game, also showed again that striker's instinct of being able to seek out space and get himself in a position to have a decent enough shot. It wasn't a great shot, but a decent enough shot to, again, just that little reminder that we whilst it's still 0-0, regardless of all the pressure we seem to be having, we're still very much in the game, and we still very much have a chance of winning this. And I think that was just, I started to get a little bit of confidence that, actually, we might be able to, at the time, I'm thinking we might be able to nick this, because it just felt like it would have been a smash and grab at that point. But I think the way that second half developed and how we defended, we mentioned it in a group chat, it was probably some of the best parts of what we saw under David Moyes being encapsulated in that game, in that we were tight, we were tough to beat, we were resilient, we were aggressive, and we challenged for everything, which was something we haven't really seen so far this season.
I think what you saw was that both fullbacks, like, for so long now, it's either been one fullback going and offering you that outlet, or it's been sitting deeper. And I'm not opposed to sitting deeper. I don't mind low block football at all. If it wins you games and you can get a European tour, more than happy to play low block football. I think the caveat to that is that you have to be able to have outlets, pacey outlets. And look, Wan-Bissaka was fantastic last season. That left-hand side left a lot to be desired. And I think we looked better when we had two competent wing-backs and Soufal a bit more of a willing runner in comparison to, well, bless him, Cresswell on that left-hand side. When Wan-Bissaka went left-back and Soufal was playing right-back, I think we looked a little bit sharper. But it's this season we have two fullbacks who have pace, can carry the ball, and will offer you constant outlets and hard work. And I think that when you're talking about the threat we pose, that's a really important thing to add, particularly with Diouf. I think he had a bit of a shaky start to the game. Perhaps, I think that's where you see he's not always played in a back four. He's not necessarily suited or used to playing there, but I think he will grow and develop into that role if we keep playing a back four, because he was everywhere. And I kind of compared his movements to like Mo Diarmi when we signed him and we did our little player breakdown of him.
Yeah.
I think he showed the best of that. He was constantly up and down that line, and the delivery was excellent from him. Even in the first half, where I think he had a couple that weren't quite, he was finding his range, but the sheer fact that we now have pace on either side means that we can compact the centre a little bit more. We can afford to have someone like James Ward-Prowse, who maybe doesn't have the legs. We can have a Souček who's going to offer you that blunt instrument, that impact and physical presence that we wouldn't have been allowed last season. Even in the earlier games, Sunderland and Chelsea, it's the fact that if you have wing backs or players out wide, left back and right back position, who aren't doing their jobs, then it hurts you massively. And I think that the second half we saw just how much sharper we were, because we'd had a run of games together. And I know people might say, oh yeah, but we look crap in those games. Yeah, but you still learn where your left back's going to be, where he's going to be making a run, or you pick up on these things in training sessions. And it looked like we were actually a team. And I think that kind of lends itself nicely into that first goal and how we scored it.
Yeah, it does. Before we touch that, we made a couple of subs, and something arguably we've criticised Potter about, because he had been doing those Moyes-esque unusual substitutions where he's like, I can't quite understand what he's doing, but he brought on Callum Wilson, who almost made an immediate impact, where he had a deflected shot that the goalkeeper made a good save. There was a corner where again he managed to control the ball. It looked like it maybe touched his arm slightly, but he disguised it well enough. And then it didn't. Jinx past a couple of players. They knew they couldn't touch him, because if they did, it would be a foul. I think what was really good about Wilson in that game, and why I like the idea that we have two completely opposing centre forwards, regardless of our personal opinions on Wilson, he had a fantastic game. But what I like about having two opposing centre forwards is that if you bring them on, it can change how you completely approach the attack. And all of a sudden, the defenders had something different to think about, because they didn't have a centre forward who wanted to stand on them and fight. They had a centre forward that wanted to drop off, would stand there, but when he did stand there, you get too close, he goes down, he wins a cheap foul. So he put doubt in their mind. And again, he got the ball, he kept it close and was able to dribble. Those defenders completely changed once he came on. They were less aggressive than what they were with Falkirk. They were winning less of the ball, because all of a sudden we had someone who wasn't either standing on them, or when he did, he would win a foul off them, or he would get the ball and run at them. And he created indecision, I think, in there, which allowed us to create more space. And, me and you have been very critical in the past of Wilson and even the signing, but credit where it's due, the guy came on and helped us change the game. And obviously another player did, was Somerville, who also, the two of them came on, completely changed the game for us. And yeah, let's dive into the first goal, because we created opportunities. Again, Forest really only had, I think, a Chris Wood header, the only one chance he had, and he completely ballooned it. And they had Callum Hudson-Odoi getting the ball out wide on the left. And again, another tame effort. But really, it was just Forest would get the ball. They'd kind of flattered to deceive, and I think would look like they were going to threaten us, but nothing really developed. And the goal came about from genuinely a bit of persistence, really. We had a throw-in which was kind of dealt with at first, and Paqueta had a role in every single goal in this, which is quite amazing when you watch it back, really. But he wins the initial tackle. There's two Forest players that he goes in on, and he wins that. And Souček plays a vital role, because Sangari comes charging in and then just gets a little toe poke on, which lands it to Somerville, who's able to then get the ball. And just use his pace. Sangari's out of position. He can't really get to him. He's then got to kind of stretch a leg out. And what I think is vital in this kind of point here is that Mikalenkovic moves into this space that we've highlighted, where Somerville is going to drive into. Where you have Jared Bowen, he's going to drop just behind Murillo. But Murillo really, he's not even concentrating on Jared Bowen in this situation. His eyes are on Wilson, who are making a really good move into that kind of channel in case Somerville wants to make that reverse pass. But another thing that's good here, got Paqueta slightly in front of the ball. We've got Wilson up there. We've got Bowen up there. We've got players in advanced positions. This is something we really haven't seen for a majority of this season. But again, that pace of Somerville, that urgency it gave us, actually then gave us some intent and, again, doubt in their team. And Milenkovic has to come out. Murillo he's dropped off. He's nowhere near Bowen. And then when we look at this situation, you've got two players that Bowen can literally slip the ball into in this situation, which again is something we haven't really seen. And I think the shot really just takes the goalkeeper by surprise because he just takes it so quickly. And I think the shot is really, really underappreciated because the way Bowen has to reorientate his body, I think he hops and skips himself around in position before he even hits it. So the footwork on Bowen to even get into a place where he can hit that. And the goalkeeper just can't get down quick enough. It's just such a brilliant finish. For a moment, I genuinely thought it went wide and hit the side netting because it was so well hit. I was like, there's no way that's gone in. And then see them all celebrating, I was slightly in shock because it just, as I say, we were in the game and it was just such a one that was taken so quickly that it was almost that moment of disbelief that I just, please let it be in.
I think it was quite a surprise as well because Sells had quite a good game, in my opinion. Like he looked very sharp. And I think you have to give credit to Graham Potter for making the substitutions because they completely changed the game. You know, he got the setup right, he got the substitutions right, and I think they more than paid off here. This is excellent from Somerville. You mentioned about Sangare, and his challenge almost makes the defender, the other Forest defender, go, he's committed, so I now need to commit.
Yeah, Milenkovic had no option at that point. He had to come out and engage.
And it plants that doubt where, you know, Somerville can then draw the challenge, and he probably would have gone down and got a free kick because he's taken out. But it's such a great hit from Jared Bowen, and you know, we kind of had a few Forest fans in the comments of the last video with our preview saying about how he doesn't make their team. I'm sorry, but that is
Bowen makes most teams in the Premier League. It's not even a question. When you look at the most goals or most goal contributions of any player in the Premier League, he is outstripping most. I think he's even at the point now where he's above Salah, or at least on par with Salah for goal contributions. And if you're saying that's a player you don't want in your team, it is absolutely wild to have that idea of mentality.
I think as well that this game as well highlighted where I don't think it was a game for the target men at all. No. The big centre forward, both of them were exposed. Wood was exposed, Matron, and you know, Nicholas Fulkrug was basically anonymous. He had two headers in the first half, which I think, you know, both came from James Ward-Prowse corners, but he should have done a lot better with. And I think it looked like a striker who lacked confidence. It looked like a striker who couldn't be the player that was needed in that system, the mobile, the mobile forward that we need. And as soon as Somerville came on, it completely changed how we were playing in an attacking sense. Callum Wilson as well, you know, I have to really take my hat off. And if he scores more than 12 goals this season, I may well have to eat that hat. I'm not going to commit to that, but I think, you know, he looked really, really sharp. And I think Wayne Rooney made a really good point analysing the run for one of his goals. We'll go into that in a bit.
Exactly. That's one of the things I wanted to pick out as well, because
it completely summed up why we need a striker like that. And I think You know, he may very well be a good asset, and I really hope he is. Like, don't get me wrong, I want anyone who plays for West Ham to succeed most of the time. There's a couple of caveats to that, but I think that it's one of those cases where he's what we need. I just don't think he's the player that we need. You know, he's got all the attributes that we need. We just need someone who's a bit more reliable. If he can stay injury free, amazing. I think he will start games, he will score us goals, and he might even have that season like he did at Newcastle where he got 16 goals and quite a few assists, looked fantastic. I really hope he does. I think if that is the case, we'll see him extended. We'll see that deal renegotiated. But talking about the Forest game, I think the change in system in the forwards was needed. And you rightly mentioned about how different he was from Fulkrug, how he was standing off the defenders and making them get into the position where they were either ready to turn and sprint with him, or they had that doubt in his mind about where he'd go. Where was he going to turn? Was he going to try and change his run? Was he going to stagger it? Was he going to take a step back? That's what he created doubt-wise. And, you know, I think we pick up on that run. It's very good. We also, you mentioned, he just peels off to give Bowen that little bit of extra space. And I think that's what a top centre forward does. That's someone who understands that the odd step that a defender can take, that extra step they can give a player, means all the difference. It can unsight the keeper, it can do all these silly little things that can add to a goal. And yeah, I have to take my hat off to him. I thought he was excellent. And
yeah, absolutely.
This would have been the goal of the game, and it is. I think it's, you know, had Wilson not done something that is completely terrible, and
yeah, I know.
we will touch on later.
We'll get on to the third and the fourth one.
I think this is the game of the goal of the game by some distance. But yeah, that would have been very much put in the shadows from something later on.
Yeah, we'll get on to the Wilson goal, which is obviously the third goal in a moment, but we'll touch on the second. But something that I think we don't often credit and played a massive part in this goal is the referee performance. I think he let a lot go in the game. He was really consistent. He allowed it to be physical and wasn't blowing up for essentially non-contact. They leading up to what was the goal was the ball, Morgan Gibbs-White has the ball and he essentially jumps over the foot of Paqueta. Paqueta doesn't touch him at any point, but Morgan Gibbs-White jumps over. Normally, a ref would give that as a foul because, you know, intent or whatever they would try and say, but he didn't touch him. It actually wasn't a foul. So players anticipated it, the touch, or getting hit. No contact is made. The ref says play on, and the ball goes to Murillo. And Paqueta literally leaps to his feet, charges down Murillo, who's about to try and play a long ball, and the ball spills on out to again the man we mentioned previously, into Somerville. And he's about to dart forward. You know, and this is kind of what I picked out. Again, we look at this image here. We've got Somerville, who's got the ball. Irvin is joining. I thought also Irvin, to be fair to him, carried on from what James Ward-Prowse did by just giving that energy in midfield. He's got a bit more pace about him, so a little bit more mobility. Somerville gets the ball. We've got Wilson up there with Mavropanos. You've got Murillo there with Paqueta. You've got Bowen, who's also going to make a darting run to get up there as well. But this is exactly where we want to get Somerville. He's got a brilliant mismatch here. We've mentioned about Sangare with his long legs, which means that sometimes he has an advantage with just sticking up that leg to kind of make a tackle. But that's also it was used to his detriment in this situation as well. But Somerville was in complete control. And again, to finally have someone on that side who can get forward with pace and to drive forward is fantastic. Again, we were getting numbers forward, which is something we just haven't seen enough. And fair play to Aina here. He gets himself back into a position, but he gets back to a point where if he makes contact, it's most likely going to be a foul. If Somerville's going to buy it. Again, Somerville's got Sangare done up like a kipper here. If you look at his body orientation, Somerville's already coming inside. If Somerville's able to tap it to the right, some of Sangari's position is all over the place. He either sticks out a leg and fouls him on the edge of the area, or we get in a position where he bypasses him, and then look at what we have in this position. We've got Irvin, we've got Wilson, we've got Paqueta, we've got Bowen arriving. We're in a fantastic position where we're actually creating an overload, or as you can see there, a 3-on-3 at the back post, and we've also got Irvin coming in to join the situation. But what we've missed with Somerville is that someone who has that, that turner pace, that agility, that ability to turn on a dime. And Sangare is basically saying, go down the outside. And Somerville duly does that. But again, because he has that pace, he just taps it past him. Essentially, he baits Sangare in, and he duly takes the bait. Sticks out a leg when the ball is not there to be won. It was a silly challenge by Sangare, an obvious stonewall penalty. Somerville wins that. He's come on. He's made a big impact. He's the person who basically got an assist for Bowen. Now, technically, he gets an assist here because he wins the penalty. So technically, it's 2 assists. Really, he wins the penalty and upsets Paqueta to do the thing that I dread and hate so much, the stutter penalty. But bearing in mind what has kind of happened in that last 24 hours, where he was apparently going to Aston Villa and it was all agreed and he wants out and painted as someone who doesn't want to be at the club, to put in the performance he did specifically in that second half. And again, he started this move basically by winning the ball. He then completes the move by putting the ball in the back of the net for the penalty. And just to kind of put the exclamation point, and yes, it may have been PR if he did want to go, running over, mocking with the phone and then kissing the badge. It was something I think the fans needed. And the moment that goal went in, I think there was a collective belief in the fan base of Forest ain't coming back in this, because they hadn't, again, as we said, hadn't really created in the entire game. And the moment that second went in, it just felt like our players were just, no, we can get more. They just seem to have this confidence and that we haven't really seen in them. And the Forest heads just dropped. And I think one of the things that was brilliant was how we managed Anderson. Anderson's been so fantastic for Forest, along with Morgan Gibbs-White. But if you can control Anderson, you stop their tempo. And I think we really slowed him down, which slowed them down as well.
I think Forest looked like us at the back end of David Moyes' time. When as soon as they conceded, it looked like they'd just gone, and they looked like they were struggling to create, and they looked like they were forcing things. And I think, one thing we've cried out for on this channel is pace, and I think Forest just didn't seem to even channel that. They didn't seem to try and pinpoint it, because it looked like they'd lost confidence in pace beating Mavropanos and beating Kyle Walker-Peters, Diouf and Kilman. It didn't look like they they would trust that if they kept at it, they would get a chance. And I think this is where it's so important that we get players like Somerville back into the starting lineup, but also have assets like Luis Guilherme off the bench. And we saw it in a couple of games last season where he was coming on and he looked really sharp, but he just needs that goal. I think it's a case of Somerville's come back, made a huge impact. He deserves so much praise for what he's done, and the fact that he takes the ball down really well, but he runs at speed. And I'm old enough to remember when we've had players and they bring it down and they may well be lightning quick, but you just know that second touch it would have ended up in the chicken run, or it would have been one.
Stan Lazaridis-esque.
Yes, and I think that it's a case that we now need to make sure we're managing the squad, and if we can keep up this kind of pace and attack, it's going to be a real asset to us. Does he start? I think for now you ease him back in. I think that's what you have to do with a player like that. You have to ease him back in, make sure he doesn't overwork his hamstring and you put too much demand on him. Obviously, with the international break, that is a big bonus for us as well. A bit more time to recover and hopefully him train individually. But same for Luis Guilherme. Apparently he did what broke his bone and
his collarbone, and
apparently he's already back training. So that is another massive addition to us. And
yes, technically we have a fully fit 26-man squad, which is
terrifying times at West Ham. You know that is terrifying.
Unheralded times.
But I think, just to go back to the goal for a second, and particularly Lucas Paqueta, he deserves a lot of praise. And I think what a lot of fans get so frustrated by is the fact that I think they saw things like personal terms agreed. And that is when people go, that's what makes people get so frustrated. And, I particularly was like, well, if we spend that money wisely, we can replace him. I think yesterday he showed why he is quite so hard. Yesterday against Forest, he showed why he's quite so hard to replace. And I think it's a case that if he can keep repeating this, even if it's just like, every 3 or 4 games, it will make such a difference to our season, such a difference to the results we get. And yeah, he deserves a ton of credit. I'm just going to go back to the Fabrizio point, because I think people like Fabrizio Romano are really damaging the football fandom online. They make the fandom so toxic at times. And I'm guilty of seeing that tweet and going, bloody hell, like he's been talking to them and judging it, because you for some reason we see that little blue tick, or we see that little guy with his crap beard. I know I want to talk, but we see him there and he goes, oh, personal terms agreed, and you go, he's really let us down. If he's gone out and talked to another club, he's agreed all of this after we've backed him. And that's what makes it, what I think made it so emotive for a lot of West Ham fans, is that, we backed him. We've really made sure we've supported. You speak to people at the club as well, and they've really tried to support him and his family. So it was a massive slap in the face, that report. But what a way to answer it and basically put it to bed. I think he deserves a ton of credit. I have to sit here with a bit of egg on my face and say I'm a very silly boy. To be honest, I do that most weeks. But I think it's a case of he really stepped up. And I've hold my hands up, I've really questioned that over the past couple of seasons, 18 months or so, when I think he needed to do a bit more. And as I mentioned, if he can keep putting in this level of performance every 3 or 4 games, it's gonna be the difference between, like, finishing bottom half, finishing top half. And I was massively impressed with him. That penalty, they drive me up the wall, but
it kills me.
When they work, they work well. And
but he's 6 for 6 for penalties for West Ham, which is
exactly
showing his composure in that situation and his reading of the goalkeeper to again be 6 for 6. Bowen, we know, is a phenomenal finisher, but he's I'd say erratic, I would probably say, from penalties. So to have a player that it hasn't missed, has put everyone in the back of the net, it gives you some confidence, even if the stutter makes you nervous. And I've always say, I've probably been, of the two of us, maybe a little more lenient with Paqueta, but generally speaking, I tend to be more lenient with players that I feel at least want to get on the ball and at least want to try, even if they're not playing well, will at least try and make that pass. It does frustrate the hell out of me, but I'm often, again, far more lenient on players that I feel are willing to take chances, which is probably why, again, sometimes I'm not lenient on, say, like Ward-Prowse. I admit he does a lot of things good, but then I see the sideways or the backwards pass, when there is that forward pass he can make, that he only makes when he's in a more advanced position, which is what frustrates me, is because when you have it in your locker, you have done it, but you refuse to do it when you sit deeper. And that's what infuriates me about, say, Ward-Prowse, is that if he did that more, I'd probably be far more forgiving and probably actually going, no, he does have a role to play. Whereas where I'm probably a little bit more, no. Once now Magassa gets his chance to comes in, he comes into that midfield three. I think the midfield three becomes locked in with Fernandes and Paqueta. I do think the two of them will have that discipline. At least they have that defensive willingness to make that work. And then, once everyone's up to speed, we'll probably obviously Summerfield on the left. We are going to see Bowen on the right. And then it is going to be, I think, a game-to-game idea on who starts between Fulkrug and Wilson. But if Wilson is scoring goals, he is starting. There's no two ways about it. And that will lead us very nicely segue into the third goal. And the praise for Paqueta is going to continue because he does again has a vital part to play in this. And Forest get the ball, they try and play a long diagonal, it gets put out, and then he just absolutely dominates Anderson. The picture there says it all. Anderson is on his arse. Paqueta's gone up, absolutely dominated the aerial duel, wins the ball against the Falkirk. And I've highlighted also Diouf. Look where Diouf is starting his run. And this is the point that you raised. As soon as there was an opportunity to get forward and support, he was there. And he gets forward. And even Irving is in an advanced position. We've got players that are going and willing to get forward and to get up the pitch. And, he picks up the position quite deep, brings the, Somerville carries the ball forward to halfway line and puts it into Diouf. And you would say, Forest have a good line here. Gibbs White is trying to get himself back into that back line. Lenkovic has had to move out to right full back. Einer's getting back. Murillo is not in this shot, but he is in this situation. But again, look at what's happening here. We've got Irving getting forward, Bowen getting forward, Wilson getting forward, Somerville getting forward, Diouf getting forward. We're finally committing players forward, and we're trying to get forward in transition. Again, this is the 90th minute, something that we rarely see from West Ham. It's last-minute goals, and a goal at this stage with 9 minutes left from Forest could have changed the complexion of the game. But we've gone, no, let's try and get forward. And this is where teams, I think, will maybe suss out later in the year, and we'll try and get close to Diouf. But you can't give him the space that Milenkovic gives him. And the ball's put into Diouf. He just keeps developing it. He's given no space. But in this whole situation, Wilson is absolutely brilliant in what he does to Murillo. He constantly zigs and he zags. He sends him one way, brings him back the other. Murillo has no real clue where he's going. And the best part is Bowen is absolutely sprinting to get there because he can see the crosses coming in from Diouf. At this point, Wilson is completely fixed on Diouf. He knows that ball's coming. So he's in his mind is, I need to get into position. I need to get somewhere where I can get onto this. And this is where it really kind of demonstrates is that he goes in and he takes Murillo one way, then he just stops, brings himself back in, and then gets himself right in between. And Nico Williams, again, was another one. If we go back a shot, Nico Williams, as you can see here in just the picture, number 3, is just ball watching. He's just looking at the ball. He hasn't spotted the danger of, what happens, that what-if defending. I kind of mentioned it a lot in the Chelsea game, where I put a lot of the problems around communication, people not doing that what-if defending. He's not at any point gone, what if it clears Murillo? What if it clears Murillo, it clears Wilson? Am I in a position to stop Bowen? And he doesn't even know Bowen's there either. And when the ball comes in, and it is a brilliant, brilliant ball, it's a fantastic header. He heads it down into the ground and then it puts it in to stop. The keeper had zero chance. Again, we mentioned about Bowen. Bowen sprints up there to get involved in this and put himself in a position where he can either score himself, whether that be from the goalkeeper making a save or even if the ball gets past, he's in a position as well to attack it. And this is, again, these are the things, Sloth, that we've been saying for so long. We've not seen enough that aggressiveness to get forward. We probably saw it under Moyes a fair bit, that willingness to get forward and play in transition. But it was nice to see Potter show some level of variation in his play and not just be this, we're just going to be possession. It was nice to actually see him slightly abandon his principles to go, we need to do what we need to do to win this game. And I think that's really encouraging to actually see Potter to kind of go, I just need to get the result. And if I get this result, I can then use that as my kind of bedrock and then start to add layers. I think that's the important thing. And that goal, such a good goal for many, many different reasons. To cross, the players getting forward, the movement from Wilson, the header. Yeah, it's just a fantastic goal to have. And to get it into the 90th minute as well, to completely not put the game to bed was... it was brilliant.
I think what's really good about this goal is that, I can't remember the last time we scored a goal where we broke from pretty much near the edge of our own area and in one single movement went up the other end and scored. That's normally what happens against us. It's normally the case that a team like Forest breaks on the edge of, the other side's area and their own area and scores a goal. I can't remember the last time that we did it. Someone's probably going to mention it, but it's one of those things where it's a fantastic fluid move with pace. And you rightly mentioned Bowen there, and that's something that I was going to talk about, where he's at least offering the outlet. He's offering that, chance to feed off scraps. If the keeper somehow manages to say that he is there to attempt to try and get the ball, that is something that we have not seen from the attack in a long time. Players breaking at pace to try and get up, probably since Lingard was locked down. Football with under Moyes is the last time I think we saw that level of players breaking forward at pace and being able to hurt teams in the transition. And I think, again, I have to give a massive shout out to Wilson, because his movement was excellent, cannot be understated. But particularly the fact he's up against Murillo, because this is a really quick, athletic and agile centre-back, and he just sends him every which way but loose. He is
completely and utterly bamboozles him. It's a brilliant set of forward play.
Excellent. And it's a player who not only understands the opponent and the opponent's skills, because I don't want to dig him out too much, but someone like Fulkrug might have tried that once or twice.
Yeah.
Callum Wilson knows that he can actually do that many, many more times, and that's how he's going to lose Murillo. He's going to have to work his arse off to make that happen, and it pays off fully. He was excellent for this goal, and you mentioned about teams hopefully, or they will hope to close down Juve in the future. I think that when you have such a good delivery of the ball from a moving ball as well, and this is something that I know people was talking about with Cresswell, where people said, oh yeah, but he's a bit more of a dead ball specialist. He could only really deliver when it was a dead ball. And I think we got the best out of him when he was in that last season of being able to use his pace that he had, in that season at Upton Park, when he was able to whip it in. But the fact that he was able to hit it with the moving ball is massive for us. And I know that sounds like such a daft, basic skill, but it's something we've not had.
He hit that from deep. Traditionally and typically what we've seen in the last few years is that would get moved further up, and then the opportunity is dead. If Jiff would have taken another 2, 3, 4, even 5 yards, that opportunity is probably dead, which is the brilliant thing about what you have with Jiff is that, I guess so, he's our Roberto Carlos. If he can start banging in free kicks with the outside of his boot from 30, 40 yards, then definitely. But it's that point to, if you have a player who can start crossing from deep, and this is something we raised, as brilliant as Wan-Bissaka has been, when you now have Jiff being able to whip in crosses like that, and then did a couple against Sunderland, so it really starts to highlight, well, actually, we're missing that on the right-hand side. And if you get that on the right-hand side, then all of a sudden you are very difficult. And that's why that season when we were so good, because we had Cresswell was able to get himself positions and essentially made dead balls. And every time he whipped that ball in, he pretty much stopped it and then crossed. We had Soufal on the other side who was able to do the, with the moving ball situation. And we had 2 fullbacks who were on par with Robinson and Trent Alexander-Arnold in that season. In fact, I think they only finished about 1 assist above each of them. The Liverpool players, that is, not the West Ham players. But it didn't get spoken about how much our fullbacks were getting those assists. It was all about Liverpool's fullbacks. But we were doing the same under Moyes. And it's, again, if we are, obviously, Wan-Bissaka is probably going to come to see him at some point. If they were able to develop that side of their game or bring that side of the game on the right-hand side, all of a sudden we are a very difficult team, because it doesn't matter where we are. We're able to kind of create chances from deep. We can get to the byline. But even if teams start to close down Jiff, that creates spaces for other players if we can get the ball into those little pockets. And I think there are things without that game that make you feel a bit excited that things could happen for us. But we've done all the great talk on Wilson. It's time now for our hate watch moment.
Oh God.
I haven't got the stills for it. It was too much to watch it back. But again, this was a counter-attack. We're already 3-0 up, and we've gone, let's go for another. And I think, again, it's a set piece, and it falls to Somerville. Again, Somerville, who's in the inside right channel. He plays the ball diagonally out to Bowen, who just brings the ball forward under no pressure. And then he just looks at the defence and goes, I fancy this. He just jinks past Mikulenkovic like he wasn't there. And then the rest of the defence just parted like the Red Sea, and he just jinks between them. And just as you're about to think he's about to bury the goal of the season, up starts Wilson to have a little toe poke and put it at the goalkeeper. Obviously, Wilson saw the funny side of it and joked around with him, and then put a tweet out saying, "Yeah, look, I owe you one." I think he owes him two after that, because it would have been probably Bowen's best ever goal, bar the league, the Conference League final. But it was just one of those moments of just like, it was like, that's West Ham.
Yeah.
It's just this moment of sheer brilliance mixed with him with like, what the hell?
I've said it a few times recently, but it's snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, and I think that summed that up pretty well. It's a bit of a shocker, isn't it? But I don't mind if Wilson can repay the favour for Bowen when it's 0-0 and it wins us a game, fine. I easily forgotten. It will be looked back on.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I won't hold a grudge.
No, it was just one of those ones who just like, but again, it's that fact that we would have won that game 4-0, and I think some commentators were trying to suggest it was a smash and grab from West Ham. It wasn't a smash and grab at all. Forest offered very little of any genuine threat in the game. They had a lot of the ball, but not much threat. We worked incredibly hard. I think that the midfield and the work rate that they all got through, and I think, quite frankly, both Paqueta and Fernandez really, really stood out in that game. And the work rate they put in was fantastic. I think, quite frankly, them two were head and shoulders above the rest in midfield. And we earned those three goals because we were so resolute defensively. We gave them little to no opportunity really to try, to pressure or to attack Hermansen, who would have got a massive confidence boost from that game. And when we did get into those opportunities, at the end of the game, we were deadly clinical. I don't think it was a smash grab at all. I think that was
not at all. The game it reminded me of was the Leicester City loss last season when we were away at Leicester City and we got trounced because they basically just kept taking their chances. And although we had a good few, Hermansen was playing against us and he made some good saves, I don't really think he didn't have any to make at the weekend. But it's a case of it was similar in the sense that they had chances, they just didn't bury them. And I think it wasn't a case of it being a smash and grab. It was just we took our chances and they didn't. And if we had taken all our chances, I still think we'd have won. I spoke about those Fulbrook headers in the first half, and he looks like a striker lost for confidence. Hopefully that changes, and we'll have two players who can offer us a bit of a goal threat. But
yeah, I think if he'd got that goal against Chelsea, that would have stood. I think that would have given him that bit of that lift. But that goal was so marginal. But again, he wasn't offside. It was offside. But again, strikers live off goals, and if you can get a goal, then as you say, confidence is there.
Yeah, and I think that kind of takes us nicely into wrapping up our thoughts on the game, because I think that our midfield was so much improved from what we've seen. I do think that you mentioned Magassa, and when he comes in, who drops out? Personally, I think it's probably going to be Souček, who will fall out at first. My heart says I would probably take out James Ward-Prowse just because I think Souček offers you such a assurance defensively, and particularly from those set pieces. I think that will help cover Hermansen, help build his confidence for a while. But
I think they eventually both come out once Somerville's up to speed as well. But as you say, one will have to drop out first. I fear it'll be Souček because Ward-Prowse is vice captain, which is why he will remain.
Yeah,
I don't agree with that decision for him to be the one to remain. I'm with you. I think if anyone is, it should be Souček to stay, and then phased out once Somerville's at that point where we're ready to really kind of push him forward.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that when we start to look at the side that we could have, and I think that is a very important thing when we talk about the transfer window and how we review it. But when we talk about the side that we could have, it's one that we look at and we think, okay, we should be chasing those sort of like top 10 finishes, those spots. Maybe push for a European spot. It's a big ask, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that is now the expectation. But if we can keep players fit, I think that should be the goal. And, potentially Magassa, as we said, Luis Guilherme coming off the bench, it's pacey players, an alternative option up top. And if you start with Wilson, you then have a battering ram you can throw on. It's things like that make a difference. And
we've got the unknown quantities as well in George Murphy and Callum Marshall in terms of players that could also make an impact this year.
Well,
we don't know their level until we see them really consistently in the league, but they could make.
If we get a cup run, if we have the FA Cup coming up, I would like to see a bit more rotation so that these players get the chance to show what they can do. And if we go out the cup early, and we've given players like Marshall and Potts a chance to start games, then we go out the cup. But they had a chance to kind of prove themselves and show why they should be starting or playing for West Ham, at least off the bench. So I think it's important to kind of caveat that we have got, there should be some optimism, but the caveat to that is the risk of injury. And I still think that the depth needs to be addressed. But yeah, I don't know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, like it says here, we better hope to avoid injuries. And, I think that kind of leads quite into that deadline day piece. And when we looked at it on the face of it, I think if you really looked at it, going into that deadline, we needed one definite centre-back, potentially two. Again, because we were thinking about maybe playing that three at the back. We also certainly, I think, in my opinion, needed a midfielder. But again, slightly hamstrung because Guido didn't go, Irving didn't go, and we probably needed a winger because we only had three and injuries, and we needed a striker. But yeah, I'll leave you to talk for a minute, Sloth, because I need to go sort out my dogs. But great thing about being live, right? But you can carry on for a second once I go sort that out.
I think Mike's addressed quite a few of the issues that the lack of squad depth has now, and you look at, say, the centre forward options, and I don't want to feel like I'm just digging out Fulkrug and Wilson, but when you look at the fact that they are not in any way reliable for a full season, it does really create this issue where, had we gone out and a player that we were linked with from a lot of the window in Gay from Metz, who's now gone on a loan to buy to Udinese, not an expensive deal to get done, but someone we looked at and were told, we had leaked by the board that it's an expensive deal. It's not. It's maybe we'll look at it. Well, Udinese got it done, and everyone knows that Serie A doesn't have much money. So how have they got it done, but we can't?
There were quite a few loan to buy deals, and at a decent fee. Even Elliott was a decent fee player that we looked at heavily, and a decent fee for it, and we weren't even interested or bothered.
Yeah, no, look, I'm not saying that we should have gone out and completely spammed the transfer market and brought in a raft of players, because that's not what I think any good side does. They don't necessarily just go and spam 5 or 6 players in the final day on deadline day. But I do think that we had the chance to really address the depth, address the options up top, and give ourselves a bit more of a fighting chance to push forward, and we simply didn't do that.
Yeah, that was frustrating part. The centre forward is something we definitely needed. We could have foregone a winger. I think that was probably the luxury pick. Midfield again. I guess I've made the point around Guido didn't end up going, but he could still go to Saudi. There's still talks that could actually now be back on, and he could go. Irving didn't, and I think the point's been made that potentially might be used. As thinking, my counterpoint to it is, I think the reason we saw a lot of Guido and we saw a lot of Irving is actually to keep them in the shop window, to encourage those bids and to encourage people to come in for them, as opposed to that was the natural pecking order within the squad. I think we'll see that now. We might even see more of Potts, because Potts we weren't looking to put him out on loan or to try and encourage deals. That maybe we'll see him in advance of, say, Irving, because in terms of maybe the pecking order of the squad, he may be higher. When we look at what players have said as well, he's the player that expects him to have the breakout season. So I think there's a high regard for him in the squad. So we might now see that the transfer window's closed, him having more opportunities. But I think what was frustrating was that we probably needed another, maybe more attacking midfielder, just because if Paqueta got injured, we don't really have someone there. Obviously, there was Timber we looked at, but again, we're told it's an expensive deal, yet this is a player in the final year of his contract. It just seemed to be a very familiar point raised that these deals are all expensive, and it's, well, if you want a player, you've got to pay the piper, and also if you're going to be so inactive for such a large sway of the window. Now, granted, we've got some very good deals, and we brought down the age of the team and things like that. There was a lot of positive things within there. There's so many things that were deeply frustrating that really brings down that kind of positive edge of it. The fact that we took so long to get going, the fact that we didn't get these deals or even have these deals lined up properly for deadline day is deeply frustrating. We know we needed a centre-back. Yes, and we did get Igor, which, whilst he had a very good promising first season at Brighton, since then it hasn't been the same. And again, I believe it is a loan with an option. I think at first it was seemed as a dry loan, but we got a centre back to play on the left hand side. But to your point, Sloth, we don't have the depth. So if you're going to play a back three, we needed to get two centre backs, but we only brought in one. We've got Casey's obviously out on loan. You then have to go, well, if we're only going to go this back three, we don't have depth. We've got one defender come in, and then you have to look at your under 21s. You go, well, who potentially can step up? So then you've got Mayers, which again is more left-sided. You've got Golomakis, who is the under 21 captain, just recently called up by the young England Lions. Both huge talents, but it's probably too early to give them, to pull them up, unless again we talk about the FA Cup. But this is part of the problem, is that if we're going to go for this back five, we don't have the depth in defence in which to really do it. And we've also shown that as a unit, they're not clicking. So we've arguably, I think, put ourselves in a position where playing the 4-3-3 is actually is optimal for our squad. And actually, when you look at it from a 4-3-3 perspective, we probably have quite a substantial piece of depth, actually a decent depth. But when you switch it out to the other formation, it then probably looks a bit weaker. We don't necessarily have the players defensively. We don't have the players in attack to really kind of supplement at that kind of formation and work with it.
No, I completely agree. And I think that this is one of the major failings of the transfer window. And I think it has ultimately led to, what we've seen today. And we'll probably do an extended video on this and talk about it more. I know I have some opinions on what boycotting can do and what the ownership as a whole will see from walkouts, because I know some people are very cynical about them. I have my own views on that, but the positive, I'm not going to make anyone he doesn't believe in it. No, I do. I think that the fact is that we need to make sure we are putting a very public front on what happened, and the more embarrassed we can make David Sullivan, the bigger the hit to his ego. So I think it's one of those things where this statement is another damage to his ego. We saw the scenes when we were getting thumped by Chelsea due to his lack of investment. That is a major point to say. It's not just Potter's fault. Potter got it at the weekend, so you have to give praise if you're going to give. If you're going to criticise, rightfully criticise him for the Chelsea game and setting up with the three at the back. If he does that after the international break, again, criticise him again, because why change a winning formula? But you have to have the caveat that there's criticism and then there is also fair praise, and it's earned. So I think this vote of no confidence today is a major thing. It's going to embarrass David Sullivan. It's also potentially going to unsettle some of the share prices if it's seen to affect the club performance. Then the value of the club dips down. And if there's one thing we know, it's that David Sullivan is here purely for profit. He wants to be able to sell us at the end of the day for a ton of money, sail off into the sunset with...
and let's be under no illusions. No matter what he sells the club for, he's selling the club for an inordinate amount of money and an inordinate amount of profit. He bought the club for, in effect, about £20 million, because the rest he then put into supplementing our debt with a loan. He then made £23 million, or between them, him and Gold made £23 million on a 7% interest rate, which they said they had to do, whilst at the same time Mike Ashley had a £100 million loan in with Newcastle at 0%. We also then saw later on Trip Smith put in £10 million at a 0% loan. He took shares, and Kretinsky, when he came in, put money in, working capital, hasn't taken any money out. So the perpetual lies and the perpetual nonsense that comes out of them is just ridiculous. And this window could have been completely different had we not looked at, once again, payday loans. We took out a £150 million loan and mortgaged up to the eyeballs on club assets. The very few
from the same company that also messed about Everton.
Absolutely, but it's Michael Tabor, who is also a West Ham fan and I think a known associate of David Sullivan as well. So say no more on that one. But again, it's the point of taking out an incredibly high interest loan but it also shows the lack of support within the boardroom, that David Kretinsky is not willing to put money in which to back Sullivan's running of the club. Sullivan either can't, won't, or isn't going to put more money into the club either. Again, to bring, say, the 90 million that could have gone into the club to ease up that. There was the option to sell the women's team, which is met with many complications along the way, which again would have been another £55 million, which would have generated a positive PSR, which the club has again refused to do. And there are other aspects that have happened throughout this window that has caused the club to be in a far weaker position than it needed to be. The club could have been very positive in this window if they had certain things in place that would have enabled the recruitment team. If they would have sold the women's team, which has been a conversation that's gone a long time. Someone lost their job because of this, hence why they were left under a cloud and an investigation. But this has been a conversation for a long time. That would have given us a £55 million boost. That could have been 1 to 2 players we could be talking about right now coming into the club on permanence, had it been done. If they'd injected £90 million, that could have been at least one other player to come in. That could have been 3 players that we could have seen that could have elevated the squad. So to say that, whilst I praise them that we brought players in like Fernandez, ultimately I'm going to take that back and go, well, they've just done their job. I would have praised them if they would have done things like selling the women's team, that giving away that 49%, still having control of the state, but giving away that 49% to give us 55 extra million pounds into our coffers. If they would have injected, up to the 90 million point mark to again safeguard a bit further the PSR nonsense they came out with, that potentially could have given us 3 or 4 extra players, or pot of 3 or 4 extra players this window to ensure that we didn't have those problems and maybe brought players in earlier. And this is why I think there are so many problems that we have as fans, because we look at it and go, yes, it's not our money, obviously, but quite clearly the money we're spending isn't their money either. It's the club. The club are debted up to the eyeball. So yes, they're doing their job and bringing transfers, but it's not their money. It's the club's money, and the club are paying for it. That David Gold, Sullivan, Brady, Kretinsky aren't the ones technically paying for this. This is all the club paying with payday loans and etc. on what they're generating. So that's where my frustration is, and that's why I think that vote of no confidence really, really does come in. And there's been a point made. We got the £55 million for it, but it took so long to use that money, and there were ways in which we could have generated cash that we didn't do. And like I say, we got a £150 million payday loan after essentially talks about protests were starting to bubble, and the media started to turn their heads and turn their eyes to the club and start to state what is actually going on, and left the old tropes behind. And when talking about West Ham and why fans are disillusioned and disenfranchised.
I think just before we wrap it up, I think that the journalist side of things, when they start to turn, we know a lot of these journalists have ties to David Sullivan. People on TalkSport have ties to David Sullivan. That's not me just being like, the media. It's fact. They have these ties. They have a relationship with the club, with the owner. However, now it's getting to the point where once you start to see mass walkouts and it's broadcast on television, it's on Match of the Day, people are going, why are they walking out? It becomes a story, and then the journalists have to report on it. Because if someone's going, wait a minute, I'm paying £60 a month or whatever for Sky, and they're not even telling me what's going on with West Ham, it's empty, all the season ticket holders are leaving the ground, why are they doing that? Well, here's why. It needs to change. It looks like it's getting that way, but the only way we can make sure that people know the full picture and see just how poorly we have been run is if we keep these things up, keep protesting and the walkouts happening, even if things are going well. This is one of the things that I know people are very critical of, and I'll end it here, is that we have to keep the pressure on. If we take the pressure off, then David Sullivan's just going to be sitting back and going, I can make a profit here, now then I can make a profit here. It's a case of you let him keep at his old tricks, and if you put him in the sunlight and you let people see him for what he really is, a parasite on this club, then we will get somewhere.
And they're not even your own words, the parasite. The parasite came from another football club, which again emphasises the point as to why we need to move away from this archaic, not even 80s style of club management. What we see at West Ham is what he tried to do at Birmingham, but he got run out of Birmingham. We needed someone to come in, but he wasn't the saviour he'd liked to portray himself as. We had 4 other people bidding for the club. Not to say that any of them would have been any better than David Sullivan, or we would be in a better position now, but ultimately this idea that he likes to perpetuate, that he is a saviour, is the furthest thing from it. There's been too many controversies over the years, too much water under the bridge, and there was a period under Moyes where COVID helped, but the fact that he took a back step and was not involved, and guess what? We saw a club look to rerunning a little bit better. Conversations were less about the board. And then when things started to turn a bit, they had the perfect shield in David Moyes. And Moyes, in fairness to him, took at times too much criticism. Some of it was warranted, some of it was over the line. But he stood there and was, basically offered the perfect meat shield for them. And has been incredibly professional about it for the whole thing. But the fact of the matter is, we have people that are inept and shouldn't be in their job. Karen Brady has been there for the entire time in 15 years we've gone to this, and they talk up the commercial pieces, but the commercials is basically only really improved because of transfer money. Sorry, not transfer money, because of the Premier League money. They've been at that stadium for what, 8 years, or maybe 8 years, I think, roughly, give or take. Still haven't got a partnership deal, and they can't work with the LDC because the LDC don't particularly like them. So this idea that she's brilliant at her job, what she does for 3 days a week, to me is lunacy. And she showed in that puff piece that she did with, I think it was
Talksport.
Yeah, with Talksport, where Neurogenesis has now been rightly pulled out by the West Ham fans, and now it's starting to report with a bit more, I guess, impartiality and questioning. Just show just how clearly out of touch they are, and have no concepts of what really is the true feeling, and they're just oblivious, or ambivalent. It's probably a better word, but we can talk about this for hours. Probably it's best to end there, but I think it's fair to say we agree with the letter. We'll probably do another one just on it because there's so much to talk about. But look, that game we had, fantastic result, something desperately needed. The deadline day was very disappointing, incredibly disappointing, really, because we have left ourselves short in many areas. The transfer window, I'd say, has been average in aspects, and we'll do another show on that, and I'll explain why I feel that and stuff. That's kind of the same-ish opinion on me on this, and we'll go into that in more detail. But there are encouraging signs about the transfer window, in that we've brought in younger players with hunger and desire, and we saw that for the first time against Forest. So there are things to be happy about. There are things to be to kind of look forward to, and we can go into our next game with at least some sense of hope, where, quite frankly, there wasn't any after the Chelsea game. But everyone who's joined the chat and stayed with us for the entire an hour and nearly 30 minutes, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I guess, Sloth, there is one last thing to say, and that is,
come on, you Irons.